Richard's going to talk to us tonight about what you can see in the western states of America. So, Richard.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Look, I'm going to do just a little photographic walk around just a couple of the museums we've seen. Okay, so the Boeing Museum of Flight, I ratted around until I found a Boeing aeroplane. So there's a Stearman doing his thing. The Boeing Museum of Flight is in Seattle. It's actually in the city. And the first thing you notice is this huge big barn with the Boeing airplane company on it. That's something I'd really love to change about America, but airplane is where they're at, so you just kind of got to accept that. That's the original Boeing aeroplane company, the big red barn, and that's actually on the main street going into the city of Seattle as you come in from SeaTac. Right next door, so if we were to come back to the right, what you would find is the entrance. And there's the long-suffering Mrs. Ewing at the entrance to the Boeing Museum for a scintillating 3-hour visit. Are we finished yet? Beautiful place though. It is just simply fabulous. And as I say, sort of right into, in the middle of Seattle. Every good aviation museum has a Wright flyer. I'd love to know how many Wright flyers are constructed. Geez, I've seen a lot of them. Taking nothing away from the boys, anybody who can fly something like that with a control system like that has my great admiration.
Richard, why don't you use your arrows?
Why don't I use my arrows?
The arrows on your, no, the arrows on your keyboard. It's a lot quicker for you.
Yeah.
The little arrows.
Yeah.
There you are, you see that? We should have more of Murray's like that.
Yeah, no, you're bloody genius.
Folks, this place is just, it just really reflects super care. The only place that I know that looked like this, well, there's a couple. I've only seen pictures of the Smithsonian. The US Air Force Museum at Dayton was much like this, and the EAA Museum. It is just simply immaculate.
Duxford's like that too.
Same sort of thing. Yeah. Obviously, there's a bit of money around.
Yeah.
Somebody's paying.
The Yanks did it. Yeah.
Sitting right there is the mighty SR-71.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one because if you have a look on the back of it, there's another kind of mini SR-71. And I said to the bloke, what's that all about? And he said, this was during a great Khrushchev-Kennedy yarn, and they agreed to stop manned spy flights. So this thing had that little gadget, and they could boot that off and run it for a little while and come back again. So as with everything, it was cheating. You can see that the ceiling is obviously, or the roof is obviously very, very strong because they've got all sorts of things. I don't think it would take too much to hold up the old Gossamer Albatross, but a DC-3 and a few other things, yeah, very definitely a little bit there. Boeing 40B mail plane. We had a little bit of problem with photography because it was backlit, which is perhaps not the best, but notwithstanding, it didn't turn out too bad. There is an airworthy example of one of those that got in the air last year, and it was at Oshkosh. I'd rather hope that it was going to get there this year, but it didn't. And of all things, it was there, and so was I last year, but I didn't get to see it. So that's one of their original mail planes. Feel free to help me out if you know what this is. I know it's a Boeing, and it's obviously a tri-motor biplane, but for some reason or other I didn't read the little thingo, and it doesn't ring any bells with me at all. Anybody?
No, I can't remember. I read it, but I can't remember it once.
Right.
Email me a copy of it, Richard, I'll find out for you.
I'll do. There's a nose that has seen some speed. Just the most evil, beautiful looking aeroplane around. In 1989 they brought a real one to
It's unbelievable.
Oshkosh.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've seen one of them fly, and boy, what an aeroplane. Working our way around the gallery, this is a little Curtis Robin, circa about 1927. This incidentally was Wrong-Way Corrigan's aeroplane. Wrong-Way Corrigan was alleged to be a chap who was going west, but he accidentally set everything wrong and went east and got all the way to Ireland. And I don't think very many people believe that at all. Now, not wishing to be a bit of a boaster, but how many of you have sat in a sled? There's the SR-71 with yours truly. To spoil the story, however, I very carefully had it cut off at the end. That is not the SR-71, the big one on display, or well, it's just the same size. This was an aircraft that had a really serious fire, and the fireys put it out, but basically from just behind where you can see, the aeroplane was destroyed. Lockheed did a beautiful job of closing up the back, and if you've seen, the Brits have got a great fascination about having cockpits of aeroplanes. Well, that's essentially what that is. But it's there, you're allowed to sit in it, but there is a little notice telling you to respect the aeroplane, and boy, there's a couple of people around to make sure you do. It was a big thrill though, and boy oh boy, it's despite the size of the aeroplane, it's reasonably cosy. And later on we have a look at the clobber that they get in when they get into that thing. It's quite remarkable. There's the one of the engines out of it, and yes, an amazing piece of technology, bearing in mind we're talking a 1960s engine. But like most 1960s engine, and John would know much better than I, apparently the fuel consumption is just, yes, incredible. The funny aeroplane, on the ground, it would leak out of the fuel tanks. Once they got the thing airborne, expansions and movement of joints, she became fuel tight. So the deal was they used to take off with about a quarter of fuel, go find themselves a KC-35, 135? 135, fill it up and off they disappear. Still holds the record for the New York and London Post Office Tower of 2 hours, 59 minutes and some seconds. What would Charles Lindbergh have thought? F4 Phantom, the one thing you notice about everything in the place is just beautiful, so obviously we didn't see people dusting everything, but boy, they were all there. MiG-21, a few of those around the place. There was one at Oshkosh, which we initially thought, because it was on the flight line, it was airworthy, but when we examined the tyres and a few other things, we realised that it was just the static display one that they pulled out of the museum. You can see NASA's F-104 Starfighter. If you followed old Chuck Yeager's story, it was in one of those things that he hopped and nearly knocked himself off with the ejector seat. The Boeing Stearman C-3B mail plane. Last year and this year at Oshkosh there was one of those, and it looked exactly the same as that, and she was airworthy. So there are a few of them around, and of course the dear old Stearman, there's lots and lots of those around the place. This one was a newie for me. Boeing's Boeing 100 fighter, circa 1928. Apparently quite a popular aeroplane, and it did some good work in between times. Quite a few of you would know about the GB, the Granville Brothers Racer. When I was in Oshkosh in 2002, there was a guy by the name of Delmar Benjamin, and Delmar Benjamin built up a full-size replica of one of these, and he said it was a surprisingly easy aeroplane to fly, but every landing was an adventure.
He killed himself anyway, didn't he?
No, Delmar Benjamin didn't. He gave the aeroplane to the Smithsonian, and it's there. So
well,
I think that was probably a damn good idea.
there was one, I thought it was 92, where the guy was killed going home.
There was a fatality.
Oh yes, that was the Hughes Racer.
Yeah.
Beautiful looking
Yeah.
aeroplane, but that fell to bits in the air.
Oh, yeah.
So there was, I mean, it was just gorgeous,
Yeah.
but there was something horribly wrong with it. It had a major.
You have to have a death wish to fly that.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, I have got a photograph I got by the tail, which is only sort of, this far from the canopy. And I've got a photograph looking forward at this thing, and all you can see is this great big barrel of an engine, and
Like
nothing
the-
else to look
Yeah,
at.
yeah.
So,
Like the Rata.
yes, a little Polycarpov. Yeah, that'd be fun, wouldn't it? No. I just had this thought. I'm building, or I will be building before long, a little Sonex, and I'm going to build mine with a nose wheel, because one of my philosophies is that I don't see that it's necessary to make things harder than they need to be. There's enough things that can get you into trouble as it is. And on my chicken heart, yeah, hello. One of the 28 cylinder radial engines, beautiful section job. This is a Pratt & Whitney, 4 rows of 7 cylinders. Can you imagine the pilot comes in and says, I think it's missing on one cylinder. Yeah, right.
Which one?
With that. Just a massive, massive piece of gear. They used to use power recovery turbines. So the exhaust would come out, go through some small turbines, a la turbochargers, but these were actually geared back onto the crankshaft. And on the Super Constellation, that power recovery turbine was worth 1,000 horsepower. In quite a few different aeroplanes, we'll have a look at a couple of them. The Corsair normally had an 18-cylinder radial. There was a few of them produced by Goodyear with this engine in it. And boy, have they got a big long nose when they've got that in there. Plus about 3,000 horsepower up the front. The good old F-86, very, very plain vanilla, that one. I don't know how the Canadians got their act into it, but yeah, a lovely aeroplane. And
Someone defected over the border.
They had a couple of squadrons at North Lufferman.
Is that right? Yeah. Well, the Canucks have just put one back in the air, which is painted all gold, and it celebrates their Saberjet aerobatic team. And I would love to see that. I haven't seen it.
Canadair built quite a few hundred of them.
Yeah, well, we built a few as well, because we've got the hottest
Ours
one.
were very different to those.
Yeah, well, that's got an Avon in it, and apparently it's just about as good as they get when it comes to Sabres. That's the Grumman Cougar. Yes, it is, Grumman Cougar, 1950s, carrier-borne vintage. Again, beautiful example. The A4 Skyhawk, of course, we had quite a few of those on the Melbourne, sold them all to the Kiwis, who had a great deal of fun with them until Helen Clark decided that they didn't need an Air Force anymore. There's a back view of the F4, and tucked underneath it is the Tomahawk cruise missile. So that sort of pops its wings out and cranks up its little Williams turbojet, which has been grabbed now and being used all over the business jet community. So yeah, the cruise missile. Hanging from the ceiling, we had a few bits and pieces. The old Beach 18, I mean, there's still quite a lot of those flying around these days. There's one down at Jandakot at the moment. And there's even a Chicken Hearts one you can buy. The last model actually had a nose gear on it. And there's one of those living down at Jandakot, the Volmar Beach 18. There's an aeroplane that had a funny history. That's the Learfan, one of Bill Lear's machines. It had a turboprop engine in it, PT6, and a pusher prop. And it went quite well. It took a while before it got off the ground, and then it just sort of faded away. So exactly why, I don't know. But yeah, they've got a handful of them there. No museum would be complete, of course, without a DC-3. Every museum has at least one. A little bit of space stuff in the place. That's the Gemini capsule. You couldn't get in yourself, but you could get your camera in and have a look. And boy, it looks pretty cosy to me. There's one seat and there's the next one. As a matter of fact, the little aeroplane I'm building, the Sonics, actually looks fairly roomy compared to that. The moon buggy, obviously NASA were pretty happy about lending them bits and pieces, and that's the moon buggy. It did have a price tag on it, what it cost to build, and I do remember it was rather a lot. The Mercury capsule, this is the thing that Carpenter and John Glenn and assorted people went up and down and then actually went around and around a couple of times in. The single seater. We then walked outside of the place, and the first thing that struck me that I thought was pretty cool was sitting between the Cessna 150s and the 172s was a Harrier. I said, "You've got to be kidding, it doesn't really belong to anybody." And he said, "No, no, no." He said, "It belongs to the museum, but it gives everybody a thrill to see it parked there. It's moving in later." Needless to say, of course, they tell you it's a Douglas AV8B. Now Boeing, of course. So yeah, that's an AV8B, and I said, it's awfully like a Harrier to me. Little story that we thought was really terrific. We were listening to the commentator at Oshkosh, and this guy is as corny as a cornfield in Ohio, and he was talking about the Mustang. He said, of course, the Mustang had the British Merlin, but General Yeager worked out all the things that were wrong with that engine, right? And he let the British have his information for free. And we were all sitting with a bunch of Brits and Australians who were roaring with laughter, saying, yeah, that was after the Brits gave you the whole bloody engine. But yeah, they don't like to be reminded that their best aeroplane had a British engine in it. You can go for a ride in a Stearman if you want. This gentleman was just pulling in for business, and he already had a queue of bodies wanted to go for a ride in an open cockpit biplane. One that I haven't seen before was this fellow, which is the B-47, the Stratojet. Subsequently saw another one a little bit later on, but again, like everything else there, just pristine. And that was an interesting look because it gave some sense of perspective as to how big those outrigger wheels are. Both the B-52 and the B-47 had that centreline undercarriage with those spindly looking little wheels hanging down there, support wheels, but boy, when you walk up and have a look at them, those spindly little wheels are pretty darn big. But a very unusual undercarriage system, and they hung on to that for those two, and it seems nothing much else. Also out the front, DC-2, very, very unique nose. And it's when you walk around it you realise that it really is quite a bit smaller than the DC-3, and that one was set up as a TWA aeroplane, as you can see there. From there we walked into the big red barn. This was beautifully lit, and it's set up to replicate the Boeing factory in the 1920s and 30s, where most everything was made out of wood. That's the fuselage coming together of a 40B. Don't know what the engine was, tried to find an identifier on it. I saw a couple of things, but I must confess they meant nothing to me. There's the engine there. It's a 4-cylinder inline, and it's got a shaft drive overhead camshaft. So that's, well, I was going to say it's really different, except that if you have a look at a Rolls-Royce Merlin, lo and behold, you find the same thing. A friend of mine many years ago was working on a Wolseley and dropped a bit of rag on the camshaft, and I can't tell you how much damage it did. The engine was running, and that particular vertical shaft with the skew gear top and bottom chewed itself to death because of John's bit of rag. I mean, that wasn't me. Same engine from the front. You can see there's the prop shaft coming out there, so that the cam drive is actually at the back. And as I say, it had a little plaque on it, and I remember looking at it, but the names didn't ring any bells at all with me at all.
It's not a Liberty, is it?
No, I don't think so, because the Liberty was an 8. Yeah. I mean, it might be a Monasco, but I don't think so, because that would have meant something to me. But the name on the engine was just one that I'd never seen before at all. Propeller in the works, so that's the classic situation of laminating the propeller, and then they jig it and machine it off by hand. So obviously it's part done and left there for people to admire the handiwork. This is where they started to get into aluminium. This is that Boeing 40B mail plane, and that's the bungee cords you can see which take the shock of the landing on the tail. A fairly substantial looking tail skid. The airworthy one had a tail wheel, because most people who own airports don't like you going digging up the bitumen with a skid. There's the fuselage itself, and again, you know, that's obviously as far as it's ever going to go, because that's the illustration as it is there. One that I couldn't resist as I walked out there, was sitting on the wall, was that photograph, I've seen it before, of the big Boeing Clipper getting airborne. And yeah, just a beautiful photo, so I've probably contravened some copyright law there, but I don't care, I've got it made up, no. We walked from here into the World War II gallery, and unfortunately, like the US Air Force Museum, if you ever do go to there or here, equip yourself as I am now, but wasn't then, with a really high-powered flash gun, because for some reason or other they've really got it quite dark. Okay, if you're taking a picture of a Junkers Umo like that one, that's the engine out of the Messerschmitt 262. Pretty swish-looking thing. Not very good apparently though in terms of the metallurgy, because their average life between failures was about 25 hours. But boy, they disappeared off pretty darn quick. We walked through the gallery. I tried to take some photos. It's a very extensive gallery with a lot of World War II machinery. Really, really beautiful, but as I say, you needed more flash gun than I had at the time. The point is, maybe it's about 5.5 inch, and you can see that even I, and I'm only 5'8", I had to duck to get in there. So it's quite a little aeroplane. This is one of British Airways, BOAG. Been to Perth once actually. I've got some photographs of it sitting on the tarmac some years ago. And they had it open so you could walk in at the back, walk through and out the front. You could have a look in the front office, but it was all perspex off, so you couldn't actually go in there. There's the famous digital readout, Mach 2, 55,500 feet. So yeah, that was pretty cool. I've had a friend of mine who's been for a couple of rides on it from London to New York, and he did say that the one thing, obviously the British Airways boys, I don't know whether the French did the same, but he said, I distinctly remember we were number 2 in line, and the captain came on and said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying Speedbird, the Speedbird service from London to JF Kennedy. We're number 2 behind a Pan American 747, and we should be underway in 5 or 6 minutes. So sure enough, on the ride, blasted off, and at the top of descent, the captain came back on and said, oh, ladies and gentlemen, conditions in New York, blah, 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 blah. Again, I'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the British Airways Speedbird service, and just perhaps to emphasise how fast the aeroplane is, you might remember we were number 2 behind a Pan American 747. Well, he's about halfway. And Ken thought that was really cool, but the next time he went, they were number 2 behind a Northwest 747. And same call. So yeah, I thought it was really good PR, and Ken said it tickled him. No such thing as economy class seats. However, compared to the little sleepy cocoons you get in a 380, they're just seats. When you have a look up in the sharp end, it's got those very interesting de Havilland-y looking ram's horns, but the office looks pretty old-fashioned, and given that it's a 1960s oblique 70s aeroplane, it's pretty well got what you expect to find up there. I did find it a little bit sad to see her just sitting there, because having seen it in the air, it's a really, really beautiful aeroplane. So walking out on terms of high speed noses, yeah, that one's seen some pretty high speed too. Made an interesting little comment, one of the guys there, and he said the British Airways pilots, by and large, had more supersonic time than anybody else in the world. And he said, because the military boys get into their aeroplanes, whack them up, and roar across the scenery at Mach 2, but they only do that for a few minutes. These guys, on the other hand, got up there and they sat up there for over 3 hours. So by the time John Cook retired as the chief pilot on the Concorde, everybody has said nobody's going to catch him. Little look at the underside. There's those variable intakes. John would know more about those than I, but as I understand, they were the Olympus engines, modified Olympus engines, and that arrangement there, which would move in and out, which is the reason they say don't get up and get in there because it might cut you in half. That's there apparently to slow the airflow down through the engines so they could ingest the air at that speed. Beautifully kept, as you can see. It certainly looks a much, much loved machine. So there's looking along that very flash wing line. It was a real treat to go on board that. And there she is, BIG. I went back through my old photo albums, and sure enough, one of the times BIG was at Perth, because they're all BOA something, with the premier one being BIC. Never did see that one. Of course, they changed the logo then. This has got a bunch of aeroplanes there. There's a super significant one. That's number 1. So that's the prototype 747. I thought the number 1 707 was there, the Dash 80 that Tex Johnson rolled over Lake Washington, but that's in the Smithsonian, so I've still yet to see that one. That's just a look over the park. There was a couple of presidential Boeings there. There was a 707 and there was also a 727. There was a very early production 707. Yeah, that's right, a presidential 72, and there's that one which was also a very early production 727. There is actually a walkway right across that. That's the main road from Seattle into the to the airport out to SeaTac. So it's a very busy road, and they've got a walkway right across the top. So you walk back and come out through the end there. A couple of gate guardians of some interest. There was an F-14, quite fascinating. They sold these to some of the people who turned out to be less than friendly to them. So you don't see very many F-14s around. They don't want them around because the other people that are still using them, that they don't like anymore, are looking for parts. So second-hand F-14s aren't around much. And there's the little Grumman intruder who's sitting alongside there. When you look back across the road, and that was the sight I saw first of all from the bus, and I thought, yeah, okay, I guess it's really nice that somebody's looking after it, but to have that beautiful nose just sort of sticking over the traffic to me was just a little bit of a sadness. Okay, we left the Boeing Museum. We booked in the Boeing tour. I thoroughly recommend that to anybody. Don't front up hoping to go on the tour. Get online, book it early. This is up at Everett, which is about 50 or 60 miles, I think, north of Seattle, and that's where they make the 747. This one, incidentally, down here is Renton, if I remember correctly, and this is where the 737 production line is. So we moved from there up to the Paul Allen fighter collection. Paul Allen's Bill Gates's 2IC, lots and lots of money, and 3 cheers for him because he chooses to spend it on aeroplanes, and we think that's really neat. Again, a bit dark, and I'd have a better flash gun, but I've just got a few photos of this place. It had only been open for 2 weeks. I saw it in the aeroplane that the Fighter Historic Collection, the FHC, was opening. And we were going to be there about 2 weeks after, so I thought, yep, we'll go and have a look. Focke-Wulf 190, and that's the TA-162. That has, instead of the BMW radial, that has the Daimler-Benz V12 in it. That's an airworthy example. I said, you can buy it, and they said, nah, it costs too much. The insurance company aren't happy about us flying it, so they sometimes take it up out and give it a run, but they haven't flown it for a long time. But it's maintained, as are all of them, in an airworthy condition. Daimler-Benz V12 and a really unique annular radiator, so the radiator goes right round in a circle. How much would it cost you to have one of those made? Lots. That's the other side of the nose, and you can see the air skirt there. That's the air skirt, the engine air intake. Beautiful looking aeroplane. There's only about 5 of them in the world. There's another one at Dayton and the US Air Force Museum, and one over in Germany. I think there's one in the UK, but very, very rare, and that's the only one that's currently airworthy. They have a nose section of a Lancaster there. Dark as, you know, the inside of a dog at midnight. However, at least got a picture of the wireless operator's view. You couldn't get any further in, so there's my sort of lean forward and click, and that was the skipper's place. Typical of the Brits. Very minimal aeroplane, as my uncle said to me. He said it was one of the things about the Brits. They built an aeroplane and then said, oh, we've got to put some people in this bloody thing. We'll have to make a little room. And he said, unlike the Liberator, he said the first time we saw a Liberator land and the crew got off, they all thought it was a bloody passenger aeroplane. They couldn't believe how many people came out of it. Oops, it's a daisy, I think. Yeah. The Grumman Hellcat, a move on from the Wildcat, yeah. Better looking aeroplane than the Wildcat, but that's like saying the new Saab is better looking than the old Saab. It's still got a long way to go. Very good aeroplane though. Hope I haven't offended too many Saab owners. Mitsubishi Zero, the genuine article. However, it doesn't have a genuine Japanese engine. Apparently that's all too hard, and it's got a Pratt & Whitney engine in it because they're easier to find and easier to fix.
The one at Chino does, and it flies.
It has.
I've seen it fly.
That's a real Japanese.
That's a real
Wow.
Japanese with a Mitsubishi engine.
Holy Toledo. Yes, I remember the first time I ever brought a Mitsubishi motor car home, my father looked at it and said, you know, the people who built those aeroplanes, he said, there were their folk in them, and they tried very hard to kill me. P-51, there's a lovely story that goes with that. They were showing a video on a continuous loop, about 10 minutes, and that's painted up in the colours that that aeroplane actually wore during the World War II, and they had the guy who flew it during World War II, and he was there watching it do a flying aid display. All of these aircraft are airworthy. Some of them are technically airworthy because they don't fly, but they have flying days once a month. They were just getting that organised when we were there. The Fieseler Storch, okay, something you can fly backwards in a strong wind apparently. Wonderful little aeroplane as long as you wanted to get one into almost no spots at all. That was the little aeroplane that somebody pulled old Il Duce out of some place in Italy, and it was the one that Hannah Reich pulled Hitler out of the middle of Berlin at one stage in one of those as well. Stall speed around about 25 knots, they tell me.
Rich, if they got 19 knot wind, they can take off, go backwards and come back and land on the same spot without going over the spot where they were when they took off.
Amazing, isn't it? I mean, it just has You know, how slow can it go?
Yeah.
Well, apparently the airspeed indicator stops before
Yeah,
the
yeah,
aeroplane does, so quite something. Mind you, if you want to go to Murray, this is probably not the aeroplane.
Probably not the
to take.
aeroplane, no.
Very nice example of a Spitfire. I think it was a 5 from memory. Got a bit of light there so we could actually see what it was. BF-109, again, really beautiful aeroplane, but sitting in the middle of the place and pretty dark. I tricked around with that a lot to get a little bit of light on it. Just in superb condition. I mean, they all were, but that, you know, everything was just absolutely schmick. There's a close-up of the cockpit open. As I say, everything, the fit and finish was beautiful. If you've ever seen the undercard on those things, it doesn't actually sit in the wings, it sits in the fuselage, and it actually makes the Spitfire look as though it's got a fair bit of a fair bit of track on it, because these things are as skinny as they came. They broke a lot of them apparently in World War II because people ground looped them. But once off the ground, they were in a really, really good aeroplane. That was the artwork on there. I never did get the story of exactly what the little bird was upset about. Here is a plane for absolute heroes, the Messerschmitt 163 Comet. If you ever get the chance to look at Reaching for the Skies, an old series they ran on Channel 9, Hannah Reich talks about flying these things. Only little people could fly them because they were tiny little things. And Hannah Reich at that stage, I think, was 70-something. And she talked about the performance, and you could just see the absolute glow to her face when she said, and it just went up. So this little fella was a rocket-powered device. The pilot wore a very, very seriously protective suit because they had stuff called T-Stoff and D-Stoff. And when the two of them got together in the little Walter rocket motor, they made it really hike along. However, if it spilled on the pilot, it would dissolve him. For all the work they put in, and there's the little rocket motor, for all the work they put into the thing and all the development, its record in combat is it managed to shoot down one B-17 and it killed an awful lot of German people trying to fly it. He took it off on those wheels and they fell off, and then he landed it on a skid at better than 100 miles an hour. It sounded pretty heroic to me.
I don't think it had a throttle, did it? I think once you started that up,
That was it, yeah. Up you went. And apparently they used to take it up to about 45,000 feet. And then at that stage you'd run out of fuel, and you now had a really high speed glider, and that was enough to do a couple of swooping attacks, and then you brought it back home. With your fingers crossed, I gather. On things that people flew, they had two of these. This is the V1, the Doodle Bug, or the Buzz Bomb. There's a more detailed picture of the back end of it. One of these, but it was so much in the dark, was one that they actually put a cockpit in, and during the development, one of the people again who flew this was Hannah Reich, and she described it as a fairly exciting aeroplane to fly. It really wasn't meant to do anything except go off on a rail, and then it had a fairly simple autopilot, and if they got the fuel right, it used to run out of fuel and crash in London. A lot of them, fortunately, apparently didn't quite make it or went a little bit too far. Hawker Hurricane, beautiful example, and when you have a look at the Merlin, you can just see all the bits and pieces there, and it really just was a superb example. We were talking about the OX engine. There's a Curtis Jenny. There's still quite a few of those around. There's a couple usually make it to Oshkosh each year. Very, very slow girl. But there's the OX, and that's a V8. Exposed rocker gear. Apparently the deal is you go along and oil each rocker, and then fire up and take it for a fly, and you get down, you oil them again. Obviously the lubrication on the rocker arms is good enough to last beyond the fuel consumption. And outside the place, a B-52 and several other bits and pieces. I had a fascinating conversation with the bloke who had the hangar next door, because I parked in front of his hangar, and he said, "You don't mind, park up there, will you?" And it turned out that he was a restorer of old piston engine aeroplanes. He did DC-4s, DC-6s, DC-7s, DC-3s, C-46s. He was involved, sorry, he wasn't involved. Darryl Greenwire tried to get him involved in the project to recover a B-29 from Antarctica. If you've ever seen the book, it's called The Kai Bird, K-I Bird. It was left in Antarctica for a long, long time. The group went to fish it out, and they got the whole thing done over a series of about 3 years. And then when they were taxiing it to take off, somebody had forgotten that they left a little Honda APU in the back running with a little can of petrol suspended from the ceiling, feeding fuel to this little Honda engine. And this absolutely pristine B-29, which would have made the second one, burnt. If you are a YouTube person, go on to YouTube and put Kai Bird B-29 fire. It's about a 40-minute film on it, and it's really very, very good. Well, the bloke, great gun of restoring those kind of aeroplanes, was next door, and I spoke to him until Margaret was about time we went. So being a good person, I went. The Pima Aviation Museum. So this was up north. This was a subsequent trip. We'd gone to Las Vegas, which is a really strange town, and then we'd done the down in the Grand Canyon and Sedona, and I'd built up enough brownie points to suggest that Tucson in Arizona would be a really interesting place to go. Tucson, Arizona is the home of the Pima Aviation Museum, which is right next door to the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. This little character and a few of his mates hang around, and as soon as the tourists come, they come barreling up to see what the tourists have to eat. Silly people put their fingers down and pretend they've got something, and they know all about that, and come up and bite the people on the fingers and often put them into hospital. You've been warned, as I was. The Pima Air and Space Museum, there it is. I have to tell you that the president of Fund Prevention decided that there was a limit to how long I could stay there, and I never actually got to the space bit of it. But there are two sections to it, inside and outside. Inside, again, just a simply beautiful museum. Guess what you see when you first come in the door? There's the Wright Flyer again. I think Wilbur and Orville would have been flattered if they'd seen how many people built them. That's Charles Lindbergh's engine. That's the little 7-cylinder Wright Whirlwind that they put in the spirit of St. Louis. Well, that, when I say that, that's an example of. That's, I don't think, it's his actual engine. This tickled me no end. This is the Bumblebee. Believe it or not, it works. It's the smallest aeroplane. It's in the Guinness Book of Records if you want to look it up. It's a weeny little thing. It looks like it would have the stability of a house brick to me. A mix of, I don't know, an Evil Piper Cub and a GB and all sorts of things. But I think the guy who built it, and they did have his name there, but it didn't mean much to me. I think his quest in life was to have the smallest aeroplane that flew.
His initials were RIP.
Yeah, well, I'd go with that. This is just, as I say, a little look at what I considered to be the significant ones. Look at that. I mean, that's a favourite aeroplane of mine. I wouldn't like to pay to run it, but that was just, well, it was as good as the one at Point Cook. If you've ever been to Point Cook and had a look at the F4 we've got there, yeah, it's as pretty as that. Now, this is a... No, this is a McCulloch HUM-1, manufactured in 1948, two-place personal helicopter. Helicopters, in my opinion, have never been the most stable things in the world anyway, and that one looks as though it'll be at the bottom of the list. However, a very interesting device and probably safest in a museum. Sitting behind it is a little BD-5. They do those with things like Perth snowmobile engines and Honda Civic engines and even little turbometer jets. Again, an exciting little aeroplane. There's the F-14 Tomcat, and as I said, and you'll see this when we went to the Boneyard, we saw lots and lots of different aeroplanes, but I said, where are all the Tomcats? And he said, and I said, but they've got all sorts of other things. And he said, yeah. But he said, we gave those, like one of the Middle Eastern countries, he said, we sold them to them when they were allies of ours, and they're not now. And we're very interested in keeping spare parts away from them. So he said, Iran, is it?
Yeah, sure.
Right, so the F-14, yeah, he's scrounging around the world to get bits because the Yanks have really chopped these things up. There's a few in museums, and I suspect there's an awful lot of the bits that are unserviceable in those too. Beautiful looking example, and there she is. It was a lovely aeroplane, really big aeroplane too when you walk up to it. Early model Learjet. This was a museum of all sorts of eclectic mixes of aeroplanes, as you'll see with some of the outside ones. The SR-71, now this one showed a reconnaissance nose. I thought I'd taken a picture of it, but that's it. Just to the right of the main display there, that's an alternative nose, and apparently it's an air sampling and photographic nose. So take the original nose off, bang that one on for different missions. Picture there of the captain, and they used to sit for quite some hours in those things, and that's a full pressure suit, because obviously if you were sitting up there at 80,000 feet, what was the story? Yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil, because I'm at 80,000 feet and still climbing. And that's basically an astronaut suit. And yeah, that just doesn't look like a comfortable thing to sit in. Those of you that wonder about those funny aeroplanes that you only see one of, that's an F-107. I don't know how many they made, but I gathered not very many, maybe even only that one. Martin Mariner, really big aeroplane, but if you have the time and you're ever in Vancouver Island, British Columbia, you go to Sproat Lake, and if you're really lucky, you get to see a Martin Mars. There are 2 remaining airworthy Martin Mars at Sproat Lake. You best go in the winter time when it's not firefighting season, because that's what they do. But yes, this was a big aeroplane, but nothing compared to
Those 2 Martin Mars were actually put up for sale.
Oh, have they?
That's the 4-engine one.
Yes, yeah.
They're painted red or?
Yep, yeah, red and white. They belong to
They have been
cruisers.
put up for sale.
Yeah.
Allegedly, one of them's been sold to a museum, and I don't forget the other one.
Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I looked at it and I said to the girl, how long are they going to keep them? She said, it's really interesting. She said, almost everybody who comes here says, they're not going to put bloody turbines into it, are they? They just sound beautiful. We didn't see it. The only reason we saw one was because it had swallowed a valve in one engine, and it was parked there with one of the engines out of it. But yeah, massive piece of gear. Lots of fun. So Sproat Lake, at least, is where they used to live. Doesn't sound like they do anymore. That is a Douglas B-18, 1934. Interestingly enough, it is based on the DC-2. Same wing, same tail, same rudder, different fuselage. It was, in fact, the standard bombing aircraft for the US Air Force, and it was made redundant by the B-17. It's the B-18. It got superseded by the B-17. You might be able to work that out. I thought about it for a while and couldn't. But yeah, so by World War II, it was pretty well obsolete. Dear old B-24, the Liberator, you can see there's a Hurricane in the background. Again, just beautiful. if you happen to be in Melbourne and you've got a little bit of time in Werribee, there is a Liberator being built up over there for display, well worth a look. They only charge you, I think, a gold coin or something to get in. And any time I'm in Melbourne, I always go to Point Cook and then up the road to Werribee. And then Margaret says, are we going back to the shops anytime soon? She really is a long-suffering lady, my wife. C-46, that's the Curtiss Commando, enormous aeroplane, famous for flying the hump in China. One of them was at Oshkosh this year, airworthy, belonged to the CAF, used to be the Confederate Air Force, now it's the Commemorative Air Force. All the colonels I spoke to, everybody in the Commemorative Air Force is a colonel. Most of them don't have a lot of time for political correctness and they're a bit grumpy about being called the Commemorative Air Force. They'd much rather be the Confederate Air Force. However, truth is the government probably offered them some money and that's what happened. There's a television show on one of the lesser channels called Ice Pilots. If you get a chance, this mob operate an old Electra, some DC-3s and a couple of C-46s. Quite magnificent. So they're still working for a living. That is just a beautiful example of a Bell Aerocobra. Beautiful example of a horrible aeroplane. You can see where the engine lives, right behind the pilot. One of the first nose gear aeroplanes. They flew it for a while and gave it to the Russians because they'd rather the Russians kill themselves in it than themselves. Nobody was very complimentary about the Aerocobra. It was just a bit odd the way they set it up. The drive shaft went between the pilot's legs. If you dropped a universal joint, I guess you'd be very short of legs below the knees in an awful hurry. Last item on inside was B-17. Again, very, very nice example. That was actually in a separate hangar. So we just had a little look around.
I didn't realise they had guns at the side of the nose.
On the 17s? Yeah. I've got a photo of the Experimental Aircraft Association's one. They've got some guns there. They've got guns all over the joint, of course.
There's
They've got
a lot of gunners around.
Sorry?
They also had a lot of aircrews gunners. And those
Yes, yeah. So all these little guys charging around electrically heated suits, and the bombardier, apparently before he got to the target and after he'd done his job, he got to swing around on the guns and shoot all those fighters down.
Rich, the Aerocobra, there are quite a few of those scattered around as wrecks in Queensland.
So I believe.
The Yanks lost quite a few of them taking them up to New Guinea.
They used to get lost. Lovely story. They used to fly up the coast of Australia. Their navigation was absolutely legendary, and of course they looked for the point because the map had a point on it. Well, when they didn't see a point, they just kept the brown stuff on the watch side and the blue stuff on the non-watch side, and yeah, often they finished up deep in the Gulf of
I lost quite a few in the swamps and that up there in Queensland.
There are a few around, and there's something called a King Cobra, which apparently has got a bigger engine and a bigger wing.
That's the
Lloyd Hamilton's got
next
one.
model, yeah.
And that's still the same configuration, engine at the back.
There's one of those at Oshkosh as a gate setter on it.
Oh yes, yeah. That's a King Cobra, is it?
King Cobra,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, yeah.
I thought perhaps that might have been one
It may well be,
because
John.
the Aerocobra had a very rounded
tail, with a big straight tail.
Oh,
and that one has got
yeah.
straight up and down, which
So-
is possibly
Could well be a King Cobra, yeah.
It says on the plaque it's P63.
Ah, well, if it's P63 it is.
Oh, it is.
That's a P39 license, the
Yeah.
Aerocobra. Yeah, okay, I stand corrected. King Cobra.
And in fact, they had one they were intending to put on carriers called the Aerobonica.
Oh, really?
This is the version of 39.
Gee, that would have been exciting, wouldn't it? A lot of the guys said apparently because the engine was where it was, it produced a very different effect than all of the other aeroplanes that they flew. And it was very different to handle and a bit treacherous apparently. Now this is outside. It's quite interesting. You'll see some of the aircraft have got this plastic film on their windows, and you'll see when we go to the Boneyard next door, that's how they look after the aircraft there. This is a patch of presidential aeroplanes that they've got. They've got a 707, they've got an old DC-6 there, and they've got a Super Constellation. The Super Constellation, they were at great pains to inform me, was not actually a presidential aeroplane, so it wasn't painted up like that. There's a really interesting lineup. The aeroplane on the left, ignoring the 310's nose there, is made of stainless steel. Apparently it's about, I don't know, 10 thou thick or 12 thou thick or something. Very, very fine. And this was something that Douglas messed around with for a while. There's another view of the collection there. And I said to the guy, so why did they do that? And he said, well, because they were worried that they didn't have enough aluminium. And I said, well, they had spare stainless steel, he said, apparently. But it didn't go very far. There's an old 310 up the way. There's a Cessna of some description on the left. Now, there's a 3-engine monstrosity, and that was a Fairchild of some description. Didn't know much about that. The Convair was the next one in line, which was a 240. That was actually quite tidy. The Viscount was a really tired, second-hand looking bit of gear. And next to those, I think I left it in there, yes it was a sort of Aviation Caravelle. And I think the Frogs didn't get enough recognition for that because it was a darn good aeroplane and they did very well with it. But, and they lasted for a long, long time. So, you know, they were a really good aeroplane.
It's got
An extra engine in it.
Yeah, sorry?
It's got an extra engine in it.
No, it's only a twin.
No, just...
What's that hanging down the bottom behind the nose wheel?
Air conditioning.
Yeah, actually,
APU
you may well be
probably.
right. So, yeah.
Could be the APU, couldn't it?
Yeah, near the turbo.
A serious looking APU if that's the case.
Yeah.
The reason why that was a very successful aeroplane is
Mhm.
because they bought all the technology from de Havilland's,
Yeah.
and all in
Is that
those
right?
section is common.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've just finished a book called Jet Race, I think, and it's a story of the battle primarily for the Atlantic, but all of the others. And yeah, I just, it's so sad that the Comet got caught out with that metal fatigue problem because that was a great aeroplane and they may have gone on to do really good things with it, although typical of the Brits, they probably didn't put enough seats in it. That was the one thing Boeing had. Interesting, there is a Beechcraft Starship made almost entirely of carbon fibre. They made about 25 of them, something like that. And then after a little while, it didn't catch on because people looked at it and said, why would I buy one of those when I can buy a King Air for a little less money? It goes a little bit faster and costs a lot less to keep. And that was really the story. So in the end, Beech said, no, we're not going to support it anymore, we're going to buy them all back. Everybody surrendered them except one bloke who had 2 of them, and he said, no, you can't have it. So he's still flying his, and he keeps the other one for spares. His was at Oshkosh
92.
last year.
Oh, there was one in 92 in
92
Oxford.
was there, yeah.
Was there last year too?
Was it?
Yeah, well that's, I've got some photos of it from last year.
Phillips Square, whatever they call it.
Yeah, that's it. The Lockheed Jetstar, 4 engines, massive thirst for fuel, very old technology aeroplane. This thing sort of caught my imagination. I'd never seen it or heard of it before. It is an S2A Snow. It is an agricultural aeroplane. It really looked absolutely pristine. Boy, it had a funny place for the pilot to sit. But yeah, so for what reason that was there, I have absolutely no idea. There were some funny ones. Little twin Navion, North American Aviation made the Navion after the war, single engine aeroplane, sort of about a, I don't know, Cessna, early Cessna 182 RG type aeroplane, and some modification crowd got to and stuck a couple of engines on it, and apparently it was reasonably successful. Never seen one until I saw that fella. You can see that classic desert country, it's just everything's parked sitting outside on the hard stand. BT-13, pre-Harvard or T6 type trainer. Now the next aeroplane was right out of the box. That was pretty special to me because that was my dad's aeroplane. And as a matter of fact, one of my uncles was Glenham 4 pilot, went on to Mosquitoes. Dad was wireless operating air gunner, and my other uncle, who just passed away a little while ago, was a bomber navigator. So we had a full Glenham 4 crew in the family. Never seen a Glenham 4, and I looked at this thing and I thought, well, how does that get to be here? I have absolutely no
Rich,
idea.
the BT-13, they call it the Volti vibrator.
I heard somebody refer
And
to
they
this.
tell me that it had quite an effect on some of the young men that would forget that they were supposed to be navigating. It vibrated so much. It was their interim training aircraft during the Second World War. They went from the Boeing Stearman to the vibrator and then to the T6, or SNJ6 if you like.
SNJ, yeah, or the Harvard if you're
Yeah,
over the
well,
Canadian
that,
side.
the Poms call it the Harvard, yeah.
That could actually be a Bolingbroke.
Oh, it could be, yeah.
Because there's a heap of them made in Canada.
Yeah, and given where this is, oh, I mean, it's right down the other end, but a lot closer to Canada than it is to the UK. So yeah, it may well be a Bolingbroke, but it's the closest I've ever seen to a Blenheim 4. I think they actually listed it. I think, if I remember rightly, they listed it as a Blenheim.
Yes,
I think they were very brave people to fly those.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry?
They're brave people to go into battle with those things.
Well, but I mean, if you have a look at the time on it,
Yeah,
it was
that's
pre-war and it was really quite
It
a
was
swish of a
fast.
piece of gear then.
Day, yeah.
But by the time it got to 1940, it wasn't much good for them very much. And I mean, Dad, Sandy and Peter all finished up on it in, they didn't fly together, but Peter and Dad did. And they flew around Burma and places like that where there wasn't too much opposition, which was just as well. Wouldn't fly apparently on one engine. A few oddballs, there's the Packet, Fairchild Packet, the C-133 Cargo Master, and again that's a precursor, or actually not so much a precursor, but a supplementary aeroplane to the C-130. Whereas the C-130 went on to the most amazing existence, this thing of course just simply faded away. The genuine and original Globemaster, okay, and that's the fella, that's one of them, that has those 28-cylinder engines on it. So yeah, electric propellers and a few little built-in problems with those. That's the, I don't know what the designation, military designation is, but of course that's the Boeing Stratocruiser, the double-barreled, double fuselage type arrangement, obviously used as an aerial ambulance. And once again, you can see those great big corncob radials on it. That's the same aeroplane, but used for an in-flight refueler. That was a Boeing developed device, that was the one where the operator down the back could actually fly the in-flight refueling probe down to hook up to the aeroplane. So he had control of those two little surfaces there. Kind of an elegant looking aeroplane, but yeah, you can gather by the great big drop tank underneath, and it had a fairly prestigious appetite for fuel. The Boeing B-50, so that's the B-29, a little bit bigger with some jets on it as well. Some had those and some did not. But I just love the way people do that. Isn't it nice to see an aeroplane put away with the propellers beautifully squared? Nothing looks taller than a multi-engine aeroplane than to see propellers all over the place. Again, the mighty B-47. Now, as I say, if you have a look at all the canopies on these, almost all of them, they've all got that blue or white spray-on material, and it's quite heavy duty. It sprays on and it thickens up to a 1.5 millimetres, and that's what they use just to preserve them. Obviously, not ideal sitting out in the sun. The old guppy, yeah. It's an interesting development, that one. I talked to the bloke and he said, well, it sort of started as a Stratocruiser and then they played around with it and then they put Allison turboprops in it, and by the time they finished modifying it, it really wasn't anything but itself. So, yeah. This was my favourite aeroplane. Unbelievably huge. 6 turning and 4 burning, so it had 4 jet engines there which are only used for takeoff, plus the 6 big 28-cylinder radial engines which were buried in the wing. I took a few photos of this as we walked around because I thought it was really worth having a look at. Have a look at the fuselage skin down behind the wing. See the great big wrinkles in it? That would cause me great grief if I were to go fly that thing. And somebody obviously did. Just been out of the shop, it had been really tarted up. There she is showing the 3 pusher engines and those 2 turbines.
Serious power there.
You betcha. There's a film that does the run around. It was called Bomber B-47, starring James Stewart and the lady who always used to be the pilot's wife. And he started on these things, and they did a lot of filming around the B-36. It's really hard to get a perspective on how big this thing is until you start walking around it. There's the nose, which I'm sure they could have done a prettier effort than that, put a bit of a point on it or something. It's a real Dumbo-looking nose on it. The 2 engines, I suspect that the cover's there because probably there's nothing in there. And who knows, there may not be anything in there. But that's the front intake for the cooling air and for the air for the engines themselves.
They used to fly across the Atlantic when they first got them, and they used to get into Cornwalls and airports, call an emergency and say downwind on 9.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's a huge aeroplane. It had an enormous range. I've got a video on it sitting at home somewhere which I must commit to DVD. But again, talking about wrinkles in the skin, look along there. I'm sure they didn't make it originally like that. And there's the view of the whole thing. And as I say, the only thing I can say to you is that it is just absolutely immense. It's the biggest aeroplane that I've ever seen. Boy, it takes a while to walk around it. It's just a very, very impressive piece of gear. I was keen to see one of those because I'd never seen one up until then. The dear old B-52, once again, Peter Yates, who spoke to us last year, I think, tells a very funny story of flying in the US, and a B-52 pilot declared an emergency. He'd had an engine failure, and an anonymous voice came across the RT saying, "Oh dear, not the dreaded 7-engine landing." So, nobody was taking his emergency terribly seriously. The Martin B-57 oblique English electric Canberra. Just an amazing aeroplane, been running for more than 50 years. NASA are still using one of those for some high altitude work. The Royal Air Force only retired the last of their Canberras, I think it was about 18 months ago. So the aeroplane actually had more than 50 years. And everybody in America who flew it, we talked to some of the guys at Oshkosh some years ago, very, very complimentary. They said it was a really nice aeroplane. Now there's a mean looking aeroplane. That is a B-58 Hustler. That is a fuel tank under there, so if you've got any thoughts that it might have been an economical ship, that will take any thoughts away. When you have a look at it, she was a rocket ship. It was a Mach 2 aeroplane, and in the 60s. Looks like a pretty slippery looking piece of gear.
Allegedly cost more than its own weight in gold.
I can believe it. Yeah.
We were diverted once, we went into the Hustler base in America,
Yeah.
and SAP didn't like them because they were all single pilot.
These?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, they're 3 crew, single pilot, you had an air weapons and navigator.
Right.
And what fascinated us was the windscreen. The windscreen was, God knows how many laminations, about 10 laminations. It would have been 2 inches thick, all those windows. And they had this cracking around the frame. And we said, well, what do you do? Oh, that's normal, mate.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because we're back to it ground level, you know.
Right up to the stage where a plane comes through and hits you in the cheek at Mach 2. Yes, that would hurt. So I was enormously impressed with that. They've obviously lost the nose wheel on that aeroplane and they haven't found anything that would fit. But it seemed to, you would know better than I might, but it just seemed to fade away.
Yeah, they only had one wing.
One wing of aircraft.
Just one base. With the,
yeah, well again, I took somebody at Oshkosh who used to fly them and he was a very interesting fellow to have a yarn to. MiG-23, Lord alone knows where they get these things, As I say, this was a really eclectic mix of machinery. Grumman Tracker, which we know, and that's the airborne early warning version of same. A Douglas Sky Raider, amazing aeroplane. If you saw the collision between the Sky Raider and the P-51 in the UK, Sky Raider lost about 6 feet off one wing and he just brought it home. The poor bloke who was flying the P-51 discovered that he didn't have any elevators, so he decided at that stage that an exit might be a good idea. It's really interesting to know that apparently he'd sold the aeroplane about a month before. He was flying it for somebody else. And then Avro Shackleton. So yeah, how does an Avro Shackleton finish up in Tucson, Arizona? I have just no idea at all, but it was good to see the old chap. What are they? They were Rolls-Royce Griffins, I think, weren't they? Yes. Griffins with contra-rotating props. Gee, they would have had some interesting transmissions in those things. This is just a quick walk down the remainder of the jet fleet. He said. North American Vigilante. You see this in the Boneyard that's really quite intriguing. That's an aeroplane out of the 60s. The Grumman Cougar, that one had a longer nose because the Cougar was really quite an attractive aeroplane, and I think they mucked it up with the nose. I've seen pictures of mosquitoes that they did the same thing to. McDonnell Voodoo 101, that's the attack version apparently. There was a selection of 50s aeroplanes there, including the Cutlass. That's the first, well, ignore the first nose. Cutlass is the next one. I was trying to recall the book I've read just a little while ago on this fellow who was a test pilot for the Cutlass, and the only thing he could say about it was it was a really evil aeroplane that should never have been manufactured. So he's not pleased with it. But there was a whole bunch of those, and we've got pictures of some of it. There's the Cutlass. Basically tailless, just a sort of a semi-delta type aeroplane. Looked $1 million, but was full of all sorts of funny, nasty little habits that knocked a few people off. Grumman Panther, good-looking little aeroplane, swept-back wing, looked good. A McDonnell Douglas AV-8B, and again, looks like a Harrier to me. They've retired rather a lot of them. I think the Brits have retired all of them. The F-100 Super Sabre, quite a piece of gear. Apparently it was the first aeroplane I think could do 1,000 miles an hour straight and level. And then we had a whole bunch of little aeroplanes, the F-102 Delta Dagger, which, you know, sort of, you looked at it and there sure wasn't much wing there. That's the reconnaissance version of the Voodoo. Good looking aeroplane, I thought. Doesn't necessarily mean anything. Speaking of machinery with no visible sign, no visible means of support, that's the little starfighter, and yeah, a brave man would fly that thing. Track of a tiger moth as well. That's a two-seater. That was just a view from the side, and the blue on the canopy is just this preservative arrangement, which does a really good job. Chuck Yeager was less than complimentary about the Thunder Chief. Apparently they used to call it the thud, and he said that's the noise it used to make when it hit the ground. The F-106, which was the Delta Dart. This actually answered a query for me. There was one of these things at Oshkosh, and I didn't know what it was. And it's a Northrop Scorpion. It's a carrier-based aeroplane.
It's either that or the Voodoo at one time, doing air displays, and they lost 5 in one hit in America.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
and I can't remember
expensive.
which it was, whether it was that one or the Voodoo. I think it was that one. And these guys were doing, just these things were
What, doing formation?
Yeah, information, and they just broke up.
Oh,
Yeah.
Nasty.
dear.
And the man said, well, I think the time has come when, you know, we have to just check out what we're doing in public displays in the future.
Indeed.
Or worse, that effect. You know.
One of the world's most beautiful aeroplanes, the Hawker Hunter. And once again, how does a Hunter finish up in Tucson, Arizona? I have no idea, but it really is just a lovely looking aeroplane.
It's like a Swiss symbol on the tail, isn't it?
Every chance, yes it does, doesn't it? So yeah, so there you go, a Swiss Air Force Hawker Hunter in Tucson, Arizona. Yep, a truly international machine. I had to go back and have a look at the book on this one.
That was Sky Knight.
Now, what about, they called it the Sky Warrior, I think. Sky Knight? You may well be right, but it's a Douglas of some description. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps it is a Sky Knight. I must confess, I looked at it, looked at the little tag on it, but didn't take it in a way that I could zoom in and read the tag. So I looked at it. I have seen pictures of it. It's a carrier aeroplane, very big one. There's one of these comes to Oshkosh each year, a Grumman Mohawk, and frankly it's a lot more tidy than that. I would imagine it would cost you 10 truckloads of money to keep one of those things going, and it's sort of like restoring a Triumph Mayflower, you know, even after you finish restoring it, you'd only have a Mayflower. The Lockheed Shooting Star, and yeah, that was the, the T-33, the training version of same. How to really make a mess of a Sabre, the F-86D with the night fighter ray dome at the front. And when you compare it to the standard looking Sabre, yeah, no comparison at all. I've no doubt it did a wonderful job. But there's your plain vanilla F-86, which I still think is one of the really nicest aeroplanes. North American put one together for carriers, changed a few things around, not the least of which was made the nose wheel strut a good deal longer, and that's the F-40. Again, American Museum, you're always going to find a Phantom in there. What you usually won't find is a Tornado. So there you are, there's a Luftwaffe Tornado parked there. I thought they were still current, but apparently they're not. And a Folan Gnat. So yeah, wangy little fella, quite cute. The last of these, a quick run through, just a couple of helicopters. I don't like helicopters very much. I had to look this up, it was a Sikorsky Mojave. Never heard of it. These couple were Korean War, the Sikorsky Dragonfly, and they were very much search and rescue aeroplanes. If you've seen that, this is the bridges at Toko Rai, which is a movie made of the Korean War. These things were featured quite strongly, and they're fishing pilots out of the drink and so forth. The Flying Banana, which was this bloke, and that was an M23, which was all I could get off there. I've certainly seen pictures of them, but the one on the left is the one that was nicknamed the Flying Banana. I don't know whether the other one was the same, but yeah, interesting craft. I'm not much of a helicopter enthusiast, to be truthful. The big Sky Crane, of course, been around for a while, and the licence-built Westland Whirlwind was built by, I think it was built by Sikorsky from memory in the States, but that had a radial engine up the front. Okay, the last place, and then I'll shut up, I promise. The Davis-Monthan Boneyard, or the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Now here's the deal, if you want to go and have a look at this place, if you're Jeff Watson and you're going to make a film, you'd get to walk around it. Anybody else, not a hope in hell. You've got to go to the Pima Air Museum and you've got to take their bus. They're allowed 2 bus tours each day. Pre-book it. I didn't. Fortunately, got the last couple of seats on the bus. I would have been really ticked if I'd have missed out, but it would have been my fault. So when you have a look at this place, that's the gate, and the rules are quite simple. The bus is not allowed to stop, you're not allowed to get off the bus. If you die, well, you'll just have to stay there till they get back. If you had to go back early, you'd make yourself unpopular with all the people. 3 reasons aeroplanes finish up in the boneyard: to store them, some, to restore them, a few, or to reduce them to produce, chop them up. That's a lot. Okay, when you have a look at this one here, you can see there's a Lockheed Galaxy, the big C5, quite a few of those, and that one was having some work done and being returned to service, because obviously they've got a lot of bits and pieces there and they do utilise them. C-130 there, likewise. This was a really interesting look. You want to see some retired aeroplanes. You start to realise that if the US Air Force is the world's biggest flying club, just how much money that chews up. F-16s, more F-16s, even more F-16s. There were hundreds of these things. What I've tried to do here, and I'll just run through fairly quickly, is to give some impression to you of the scope of this joint. I've never seen this many aeroplanes in all my life. None of them were going anywhere. These are bits for the old A-10 Warthog. Okay, so this is that tank busting, ugly looking thing with a gun in it. I don't know whether you've seen that email that did the rounds talking about its gun. Yeah, and the gun is 1.5 times longer than a Volkswagen Beetle. There's a picture of a Beetle with this gun sitting next to it. It fires 42,000 rounds a minute. 65. I worked out that if somebody went out and fired that gun for a minute, you know, they'd chewed up about $125,000 worth of ammunition. So, jeepers, the flying club's looking more and more expensive. Various fuel tanks, bits of centre sections for the A-10. Jet engine, anyone? These jet engines had been removed from aircraft and they have been crated up in those special crates. So they had just arrived, they're just about to be crated up and sealed. And again, look behind, you know, squillions and squillions of aeroplanes. More over on the right-hand side, you can see those cases that they put the jet engines into. If you think about the average PT6, which is like a suitcase-sized turbine engine, costs about $250,000. How much are they? Yeah, scary stuff. more and more engines, more and more old aeroplanes. These were aerodynamic sections that fitted underneath the Warthog, and they were taken off the aircraft and they're being stored there so they can be removed and fitted back on for different missions. So that's more about storage for the dear old the Warthog. This is prototype row. They've got a bit of a sense of history here, which is kind of nice. There are a whole bunch of prototypes down there that are standard aircraft that have been modified, or in the case of that funny thing with the very high mounted fuselage engines, that had special flat blowing devices. And yeah, these are all one-offs basically, or one or two-offs, and they've decided they'll keep this road for all the peasants to look at when they go on their bus ride. Oops, oopsie-daisy. On the other side, on the other side are basically the single seat jets. So there's your F-14, and when you look around, there aren't any. They've all gone. They've all been chopped up. That's the only one they've got left. So they've been distributed to museums, one in the row, and everything else has been hacked up. The A4 Skyhawk, okay, and again, sitting there, a two-seat variant. Incidentally, one of the questions we asked was, why here? Is it about corrosion? And the guy said, no. He said, that's half the story. Look where they're parked. Everything, including the C5s, are parked on the clay. And he said, it's as hard as a brick. So if you actually had to provide tarmac to sit all these aeroplanes on, you would be up for millions and millions and millions of dollars. These are just bulldozed flat. The Grumman Intruder. That's the reason I chose that one. I said to him, what's the story there? And he said, well, they're talking about it being storage, but there's rumour that it got put down on the ground very, very hard indeed, and it's a little bit out of skew. And he said, no, I don't think it'll be out of here. The old Crusader, aeroplane out of the 60s. The F-100 Super Sabre. And you'll be quite intrigued as we get to the end. There's the Voodoo. There's the F-117.
Stealth fighter.
That's the stealth fighter. So when you look at it, there it is. It's obviously in stealth mode. There's the three wheels and the chocks. So it's nice to see government workers with a sense of humour. When you have a look there, P3 Orions, just have a look at the group. Zillions of them. F-106, again, long, long gone. Our favourite B-57 oblique Canberra. The F-111.
At least they didn't bury theirs.
Sorry?
At least they didn't bury theirs like we did.
What's that?
All our F-111s were buried intact.
So I believe. Point Cook got one, but there's basically they didn't hand them out anywhere
I
else.
think Ambulance got one as well.
Yeah. So why would they do that?
Something about it was going to cost $1 million per airplane to get all the hazardous material out of it.
Oh,
So they said,
no, can't do it.
and that's
Mm.
CRA clear, I reckon.
Yeah, I'm a bit with you. Well, when you look, if you wanted to go over to Davis-Monthan and put a bid on, believe me, there's a lot of them available. The man in the bus said, now, he said, our good friends from Australia, he said, they're the only ones who, right up until just recently, were operating these, and these 3 lines of airplanes are for the Australians. And we've made a lot of money out of them. A Neptune. So, yeah, really, really senior pieces of machinery. A couple of F-111s, one with the wild weasel electronics bits and pieces in the tail. A couple of P3 Orions. You notice the far one has got that fairly strange looking radar array on the fin, and that was the difference between the two of them. Don't know what it was, neither did the man with it. That's a G1, original old Gulfstream 1, modified for experiments with prone piloting. So they had some guy lying on his stomach flying the aeroplane. Sure, why you do that? Perhaps it makes him more G tolerant.
Another one of those vibrating planes.
And every now and then, this is a military base. It's only for military aeroplanes, but every now and then there's a ring-in. And I said, well, how does that happen? He said, easy. He said, some military mob would have chartered this off them for some particular reason. And it got to the end and they said, yeah, we don't want it back. So bingo, guess where it finished up. The Shooting Star, and then another funny little aeroplane. I think I actually wrote that down. A T-46, and you've got my entire knowledge about a T-46. It's not a little Cessna Tweety bird. I asked some questions about it, and the guy said, I'm sorry, I don't know very much about that one at all. At the end of the line, there were a couple of F4s. Now the interesting thing is, there's a lot of these, and they are converting them into drones. So they take them, referred them as required, fly them down to Pats River, and then the missile boys get up there, and off they go with somebody flying it like a remote control model aeroplane. He does his best to save the Phantom, and the hotshot Top Guns try and shoot them down. I think the environmentalists will get to them eventually. Now, these were the aeroplanes. You're probably aware of the fact that the US government are retiring their Boeing 707, I believe, KC-135 fleets. These engines, incidentally, take two. These aeroplanes have been re-engined with GE TPF 731s, the Boeing 737 engine. I know that John Travolta did it to his aeroplane. It cost him $6 million. I think it was about $1.5 million for each engine, and another $1 million to $7 million, another $1 million to have the job done. Every one of those things had that done to them. So there's all those really beautiful engines, and there are some of them. And there are some more of them. And there are some more of them. And there are some more of them. And as I say, really, what I was trying to do there was just sort of get some scale. There are literally hundreds of these things there, and each one's millions of dollars of aeroplanes. So, just fascinating pieces of gear, and more yet. So we drove for ages looking at all of these bits and pieces. There's part of the C-130 Hercules part, and the Hercules part was probably the biggest one of the lot. What fascinated me was arrangements like this. Now this is an aeroplane out of the 60s and early 70s, and there's still dozens and dozens of them. So what's the story? And he said, well, they used to be drones before the F4s, and apparently they haven't got around to chopping them all up. That's the Hawkeye aircraft early warning radar thingo, and they're retiring quite a few of those as well. Again, you come back to another section. Notice there's a couple of these which are actually 707s, or they are executive aircraft. And this lot, I took a few of these to show you things in various states of dismantling. So this one has had the gear taken out of it. I think 3 of the 4 engines were gone. You can see that all the rear empennage of the aeroplane has been taken away, and it's obviously been gradually taken back to produce. Again, great host of these things, only one of them's still got a tail on it. And every now and then, again, there's a few ring-in civilian ones. It's one of those things that it's, for an aeroplane enthusiast, a little heartbreaking to look at, because here's these poor old things that were once great machines of the sky, and now they're just being reduced gradually to fodder for a furnace. So this was just driving along, and we're just taking photographs of line after line after line of these things. And here's, you know, yet more of them in different stages of dismantling. You can see that the nose gear's out of that one. And that's the other thing that happens. This is a high-class wrecking yard, if you like, or a aeronautical recycling service. So somebody comes along and says, I need a nose gear for a 707. Yes, sir, we can do that for you. Bingo. And one of these goes. So it was almost endless. And, you know, I was speechless by the end of this, because we just saw so many, literally hundreds of these old girls.
I wonder why they take the tail off first.
I think it's about centre of gravity as well, Murray, because once they start taking engines out of the thing is terribly tail heavy. And you see they've got those wooden stands, and they prop them up. And eventually, I know they've got some kind of a guillotine that hacks the thing to bits. They're pretty picky apparently. They get in there, strip all the wiring harness out, and that all goes in a bin. And, you know, that gets melted down for the aluminium. C5 Galaxies there. They're the C5As, quite a few of those were being taken to bits. There's the Warthog line, there's a whole bunch of those being taken to bits. The little Boeing, not little, the Boeing Chinook twin-engine helicopter, and you know, have a look, there was about 4 lines of those. So it really got very, very busy. That's the C5s, and those ones were, they told us they were at the end of their lives, and they had to be dismantled, and again you can see them there. Now, those aircraft you're looking at in the background are B-52s. I would love to have had a look, because apparently they're just, you know, there's still dozens and dozens and dozens of them there, but they didn't take us over there. Now, this is the bit that got to me. I was really tickled because there was a little willy-willy went through the place, but I was more interested in the fact they're vigilantes. Now, they haven't been flying since early 70s, and they're still sitting there, so you have to wonder. There's the F-111 lines. I think there was about 5 lines of those. You can see 2 of them there, and they were for the Australians, but needless to say, the Australians had only just lost interest. There's the next couple of lines of them there, and there's the final line, so maybe there was half a dozen lines of them. F4 Phantoms, these are the guys that are being made into drones now. There are a lot of those aeroplanes, and they are just simply churning them out. They get them airworthy, fly them to Paxwood with a pilot, and bang, there's a drone. The Rockwell B1. And even those things, you know, you look at them. And I mean, these ones have been taken to bits. B-52's right at the back, and this is another lot of C5s just coming to bits.
If you get sick of pushing the little arrow, try your space bar, Rich.
Yeah, we're almost there. So, I mean, this was now on our way back out, because all they do is a loop. And as I say, I apologise if you find it a bit tedious. I was just gobsmacked with how many of these things were there and how much money each single aeroplane represented.
Have they got another park at all like this in the States, or is this the only one?
No, this is it.
Okay.
If you go to Mojave, that's where the airline.
That's the storage one.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a Boneyard as well.
Oh, is it?
Mojave, yeah. All the old Lancet aeroplanes are there.
Right.
They're not going anywhere.
Right.
Little T-38s. Once again on our way out. Another poor old 707 looking very sad and sorry for itself. And, you know, these were just in the last line, and look at them there. I mean, all of these photographs are different segments of the park. So it's just absolutely incredible. Now, I don't know what they were. Somebody said Saturn V, but to be honest, I would have no idea. All I can tell you is there were rockets. They were the only rockets I saw. The last couple of items, well, once again, another bunch of 707s on the way out. C5 Galaxy, and this is the restoration area, and you can see the F4s there. Those are the blokes going there. Now, the last thing we looked at as we went out, apart from that C5, was one section of the C-130 park. And it was just Hercules as far as you could see. So, folks, as I say, what I hoped to do there was get you a bit of a perspective on how big this joint is. And we only saw this one little loop. So there were stacks and stacks of things, like I said. I just looked at it and thought, you know, how much is a 707? And the answer is zillions.
And there's a paddock full. And full of them. And full of them.
Yeah, it is. I sort of went quiet, and everybody else did on the bus, and they said,